Hey, this video is to promote my 2020 fundraiser for purchasing mosquito nets, insecticide-treated mosquito nets for the Against Malaria Foundation, Christians versus Skeptics. So we're going to see a fundraiser in Canada and a fundraiser in the United States. Which team can show more benevolence to making the world a better place? It's an ideal way, I think, to have a little bit of friendly competition and camaraderie as we share a joint humanity to make the world a better place. But in order to set up and hopefully promote and get the word out on this fundraiser, I want to talk a little bit about philosophy of charitable giving. So about 14 years ago, the American Society for the Protection of Cruelty, or the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, launched a monumentally influential fundraising campaign featuring songs of sad-looking dogs in cages, overlaid with Sarah McLachlan singing the song Arms of an Angel. That irresistible juxtaposition of image and music pulled at the heartstrings of millions, resulting in a campaign that raised more than $30 million for the ASPCA. The ads have proven to be so emotionally affecting that even McLachlan herself says, when the ads come on, quote, "I can't change the channel, I can't take it, I can't even look at it, it's just so depressing," unquote. The ASPCA ads perfectly illustrate a well-established fact that when it comes to charitable giving, most people are motivated more by emotion than reason, as Jim Gaffigan bluntly put it in one of his comedy sketches while speaking in the voice of one of those forlorn strays. "That's a little heavy-handed, Sarah. We are just dogs after all. There's still starving kids in Africa, right?" No, the point is not that passions and personal conviction should never enter into giving, but rather that our passions should be guided by our reason as we ask some important fundamental questions like these. What is the most good that I can do with my money and my resources so I can help others, reduce suffering in the world, increase wellness in the world? Now that question in turn leads into other hard questions, such as the one raised by Gaffigan. What portion of giving should go to stray dogs, and what portion should go to starving kids in Africa? And then there is another question. How effective is the charity to which I am donating? What portion of my dollar actually goes to the charitable cause that I am ostensibly donating to versus other costs, such as administrative costs, advertising, and promotion? If only 40 cents on the dollar actually goes to helping Benji find a new home, shouldn't I want to know that? Might I want to consider giving to a more effective charitable organization? Some years ago, those kinds of questions drew me to the movement that is known as effective altruism. Put simply, effective altruism is both an ethical philosophy and a social movement, one committed to the application of reason in our ethical decisions and charitable giving to the end of maximizing the potential good we can accomplish. Once I had committed to ethical altruism, it did not take long to identify the Against Malaria Foundation as one of the gold medal winners at the Ethical Altruism Olympics. AMF is one of the top-rated charities at the world's leading charity rating agencies, which focus on impact, such as GiveWell, The Life You Can Save, and great nonprofits. And it was for that reason that I selected the Against Malaria Foundation, or AMF, as the one that is going to be the focus for our friendly competition of atheists and Christians, or skeptics and Christians, collectively attempting to make the world a better place. Well, Rob, thanks for joining me. I'm delighted to have Rob Mather here as the CEO and founder of AMF, one of my favorite charities in the world, I should say. Now, you founded AMF in 2004, as I understand, to provide insecticide-treated mosquito nets to vulnerable populations, primarily in Africa. So I'd like to begin. Why the focus on malaria as a problem, and why mosquito nets as a solution?
So why malaria is a problem? Because when I started looking at if we got 1 million people to swim, which is what I was trying to do initially via setting up World Swim Against Malaria, the question I asked myself is, where would we put that money to have the most impact? And I did a little bit of research looking at HIV/AIDS, TB, malaria, landmines, fresh water. And once you scratch beneath the surface of all of those causal areas, one of the things that really stood out to me was that 7 jumbo jets or 7 747s full of children under 5 died from malaria every day. And that was pretty shocking. And I suppose to your second question, which really is sort of goes hand in hand with the first question, the most effective thing we can do to protect people from malaria is to have them sleep under long-lasting insecticidal nets, because it stops the malaria-carrying mosquito that bites between 10 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning from getting to people who are sleeping underneath them. So the combination of malaria, there is so much we can do, and nets, that is the mechanism for doing it. That's what came to pass.
Now, why the focus in particular on Africa as a geographic region rather than expanding to Latin America, Southeast Asia, et cetera?
Again, another good question, and a simple answer to that one is that 90% of the malaria burden and the cases of malaria and the deaths from malaria occur in sub-Saharan Africa. So malaria does occur effectively between the tropics, and it therefore occurs in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Asia, but the dominant geography is in Africa. So that's where you've got very, very high malaria burden areas, and that's where we focus our efforts, as do really all of the organizations working on malaria.
And why did you found the AMF rather than simply investing in some pre-existing charitable NGO working in those regions for similar ends?
I guess, in a sense, because I'm not very good with a remote control of a television, if that isn't a rather strange answer to your question. But in trying to turn off the BBC News one evening, I happened upon a 1-hour documentary about a small child who suffered 90% burns in a house fire, a little girl called Terry. And I was extremely moved by her story, persuaded 2 friends to swim a distance equivalent to the English Channel in a swimming pool, because I'm not brave enough or fit enough to do the real thing. That's about 35 kilometers. And one thing led to another. And what started as a 3-person swim became 10,000 people swimming in 75 countries around the world. And we raised a lot of money for Terry, and 100% of the money we raised went to her trust and her trust fund. The question I was asked by somebody who was involved in Swim for Terry, as we called it, was, what are we doing next year? And to get somebody off the telephone, quite frankly, I said, well, maybe we'll get 1 million people to swim. So the idea was that we would do something ourselves. We could all contribute and help by doing something. And I had actually looked at what existed out there in terms of malaria activities, and there was no dedicated malaria charity that I could find. There were organizations that had malaria as part of their portfolio in various ways, but nobody who focused on malaria. So I felt I may want to do something in this particular way, because we can then be very controlled in the way that we are efficient with the money that's donated to us, and we can target this particular intervention. And I felt that the best way of doing that was to set up a charity myself.
So you mentioned efficiency. What percentage of $1 or £1 donation to AMF actually goes to mosquito nets versus to administration or promotional costs, et cetera?
Well, the simple answer is 100%. So 100% of the money that we receive from the public buys nets, and not a cent comes off the top. And that's because we have very low costs as an organization. There are 9 of us within AMF, 7 people are salaried, and those costs are already covered. And those are the only costs that we have as an organization in terms of central costs. We don't have any banking, accounting, legal, office costs. You name the cost, we don't have it, either because it doesn't exist or because those services are donated pro bono. So I don't have to take any of the donor money and put that into covering things that, in a sense, don't help important infrastructure, but don't help the people of Africa that we're trying to support or assist. The actual answer, I suppose, if somebody gave me $100, the actual answer is about 102%, because we earn some interest on that money in the bank. Sometimes there's gift aid in the UK, so the government tops that up a bit. So we're looking at more than 100%. But I think the number to stick with is, everything.
Wow. Now, I heard an interview with you where you gave an example that when you needed translation done for a website, you would call up to translators and ask people who would do it pro bono. Could you say a little bit more? I love that kind of out of the box thinking. Say a little bit
Sure.
more about that.
Sure. I guess what I've done when I was seeking help in the early stages of AMF, and even today, I mean, it's very much the case that I had to say to people, look, I can't do this on my own. This is going to be a big team effort in some way. And so, in fact, I called a number of organizations, corporations, and said a little bit more politely than I'm about to put it, but please, will you help me? But I'm not going to pay you. Because you don't need $5 more than a couple of kiddies in Africa need a bed net. The cost of a net was then $5. Today, it's about $2. And in a similar fashion, I felt that through one or two experiences I'd had through Symphoterry, where people were absolutely terrific in offering assistance and help for free, and they would, in a sense, pay for things, making copies of DVDs and that sort of thing. I thought, I'm just going to go and ask, because if I don't have to spend £5,000 or $6,000, $7,000 on having a website translated into German, then I can buy $7,000 worth of nets, and that the upside of that is amazing. We can protect another 5,000-6,000 people, and so a little bit of research on the internet took about 10 minutes. Found in the case of German, but we can multiply this story by 10 because it applies to every language we translated the website in, out of a desire to be courteous to all of those people who would be from different countries and have their own native languages. They wouldn't want to read it in English. I mean, we should put it in French and Spanish and German and Chinese and so on. And so I found 48 professional translators. Their job, they're paid to do that. And their details are readily available because they like to be contacted to, be asked if they would do fee-paying work. And I sent them a short email rather than dear all, dear Claudia, dear Johannes, etc. So very sort of tight email, and said, this is what I'm doing, trying to put 10,000 words into this language because 7 jumbo jets full of children die every day, and we're trying to do something about it. And and I asked for 4 people. I said, if we had 4 people that would volunteer to do 2,500 words each, then that would get the website translation done. And if it could be done over a month, that would be great. So we didn't want to put pressure on people, so there was flexibility. And the wonderful thing that happened, and it's been very much a very strong vein of experience through the last 15 years for me working with AMF, is that the humanity from people was just sensational. And within 24 hours, I had 44 positive responses. So I could have translated the website into German 11 times over for free. And that's very much been a theme of the way when we've gone out, I phoned people and said, I don't know how to do this. I need help. Who can help me? With a specific dialogue attached to it. And I can honestly say I've never had the response other than me. So how fantastic is that people are prepared to stand up and say, we'll help.
Yeah, that's excellent. In terms of the nets themselves, what happens if there's like a little rip in the net and a mosquito could get through that? Could you say something about the insecticide, I guess, as well as part of the solution?
Sure. So the humble bed net, as I often refer to it, more technically the long-lasting insecticidal net, because the insecticide lasts a long time, is both a mechanical barrier, the net, but also an insecticidal barrier, albeit absolutely safe for everybody that sleeps underneath. A small 2-kilogram baby, which would be a very small baby, would have to lick about 2 square meters of the insecticidal net to get a small tummy ache. So it's perfectly safe and has gone through decades worth of assessment by the WHO, and which is why we all distribute them in their millions. But as you, in a sense, allude to, the nets are distributed in challenging environments, and so they do eventually become ripped and torn and have holes in them. But because the mosquito doesn't do an aerobatics maneuver through a hole, it lands on the net and migrates to the hole to then try and get inside. It's actually picking up your CO2 coming through the hole, believe it or not. It then we have an opportunity to have the mosquito pick up insecticide on its feet, which causes knockdown, in a sense, kills it. So the wonderful thing about these nets is the insecticide lasts for the lifetime of the net. And the net, even though it's compromised with these rips and holes and tears, remains 99.x% effective through the 3 or more years that or 3 or so years that the net would last. So it's a wonderfully simple mechanical barrier plus.
Now, there's obviously an important focus on saving the lives of children, which you very articulately stated with this haunting image of 7 jumbo jets going down every day as an equivalent. But I take it it's not just the loss of lives, as important as that is, but it's also saving people from misery, from the extended impact of an illness from which they must recover, from economic adverse impacts upon the environments, communities where people are stricken with malaria. Could you say a little bit about that, some of those ripple effects as well?
Sure. I mean, I suppose 2 big categories that we consider. There's the humanitarian impact of malaria, which I hope that anybody listening to this would agree. Now we're at about 200 million people that fall sick with malaria each year and 400,000 people that die. And the numbers may be higher than that because it's often pretty tough to get accurate data in some parts of Africa, but we're talking about very large numbers of people being affected. So the humanitarian aspect is clear. The economic aspect is also pretty clear in that malaria is, if not it's one of the biggest drags on the economy of Africa, because if you are sick, you can't teach, you can't drive, you can't farm, you can't function, and therefore you're not a productive member of society in that way. And we're looking at roughly a 12-fold payback, if you like, if you want to look at the economic aspect, that for every $1 million we spend fighting malaria effectively in the continent of Africa, we improve the GDP of the continent of Africa by $12 million. So it's a sort of 12 to 1 multiplier. So a humanitarian imperative to do something about malaria, but also an economic one. And if we wanted to, in a sense, support Africa in its development, and many African countries in its development, fixing malaria is very, very high on the list.
Excellent. So you're against malaria clearly, but it's worth adding you're also by implication against West Nile virus, Rift Valley fever, and all of these other diseases that can also be transmitted by mosquitoes. 2 more questions I'd like to ask as well as we conclude. So first of all, how much money over the years has AMF raised? How many lives would you estimate that you've saved?
So over the 15 years we've been going, we've raised $268 million to date. So we were really thrilled to go through $250 million a few months ago. And that's gone in 3 phases. We sort of raised $1 to $2 million a year for about 7 years, and then it sort of jumped up to around about the 10 mark for 3 years. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, it's between sort of $35 and $50 million a year, albeit I could allocate another $150 million more than I have at the moment right now. So there's a significant gap in funding. So that's the total amount we've raised. If we were to then equate that to, look at the impact of the funds raised, and you very kindly said you in the question, I would say we, in the sense that it's not just the team of people at AMF, the donors, the partners we work with in country, it's a very large extended, group of people that together, that money, once all the nets are deployed, because some of them are in the process of being deployed, I think we could comfortably say within about a margin of, plus or minus 20%, to be generous, it's probably somewhere around 100 to 110,000 lives that will be saved or deaths averted, I should say, and roughly 1,000 times that, so something in the order of 100 million cases of malaria that haven't occurred as a result of those nets, and that's roughly about 225 million people that will have been protected with these nets. Those sort of numbers. So together we've made a difference, but there's more to do.
Oh, that's phenomenal. Last question. So there's a restaurant chain in the southern U.S. and California called In-N-Out Burger, and for years they've been famous because they have a very limited menu: hamburgers, fries, and shakes. There's been a lot of pressure for them to expand their menu over the years, but they've just focused on that. And I think it's sometimes the same with NGOs, that there's a pressure to expand the menu. So do you ever get pressure to expand the menu in terms of the ambit of what you're addressing? And how do you kind of remain focused just on mosquito nets and malaria?
We remain focused on nets, on malaria, because there's a lot to do with malaria, on nets because there is as I indicated, there's a massive gap in funding for nets, and they are the most effective thing. So we wouldn't want to, go to something that's less effective. We do get involved in certain activities that support what we're doing, which is a little bit of, if you like, a sort of an additional way that we can contribute. So an example I could give is that Darwin told us that that the fittest survive, and so we would expect to see some sort of resistance developing to the insecticide used on the nets over time, and we're starting to see that certain species of mosquito are developing some resistance. So one of the pieces of research that was very important to do a number of years ago was to put in large quantities in the field a new type of net that had a different chemical attached to it, along with the insecticide, that could switch off the resistance mechanism and therefore had the potential to be more effective against mosquitoes showing some sort of resistance. And we funded 6 million of those nets to be distributed in Uganda, and we attached to that a randomized control trial. So a gold standard piece of research run by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, two of the leading organizations in the world, and a group in California and a group in Uganda. And we funded that RCT. It's public information, and we put another $2.5 million into that with an agreement from one of our particular donors that they would fund that. And so in a sense, we were able to step up to the plate and say, let's get on with this research now. We can't wait any longer. It's going to be 2 years until we get the results. And the good news is that results of that work were that the so-called PBO net, it's the name of the chemical, proved to be between 20 and 25% more effective than the standard net in those environments. And as a result, PBO capacity and key PBO purchase and deployment has now headed north. And so again, we're pleased to have been very much part of funding and driving or being involved in that research, but it's still, as you can see, around the theme of nets. So it's not just funding nets and distributing them. There are some things that we do along the way if we feel they're important.
Excellent. Well, it's been a delight to talk to you, Rob. I want to say that if Marvel's going to make a new superhero movie, I think they should focus on AMF. So I'm really grateful for what you guys do. It's an inspiration to me. And thanks for sharing your time with us today.
My pleasure.
Take care. Well, I trust you can appreciate after that interview why AMF is a charitable organization very much deserving of your benevolent donation. They will take 100% of whatever you give them to reduce suffering, protect children, and make the world a better place. And that sounds to me like a wonderful basis for a competition between skeptics and Christians. Now, one last thing I want to address. I began by talking about the ASPCA, Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Sarah McLaughlin, and dog suffering and so on. And so I just want to end by saying that one of my dogs right here is Sunny. I talked to him about it, and he believes that you should definitely give to AMF this year rather than to the ASPCA. So if it's good enough for Sunny, it should be good enough for the rest of us as well. Thanks. Please be generous, donate, and take care.